Hi, this is Dame Pasty from WatchersOnTheWall.com, here to do your weekly brush-up of last week's episode called Kill the Boy. Now remember, spoilers are always at the end. So let's get started. So we start the episode with Grey Worm in bed, and we're not sure if he's alive or dead, and we see a very sad Missandei sitting next to him. They just have to tease us with that, and then they zip off to the throne room, where we see Sir Barristan laying on a funeral pyre, and he is obviously dead. And Dany is standing over him grieving and sad and pissed off. Really, really pissed off. And then Hizdar has the nerve to come in and say he's sorry. Dany finally decides to take Dario's advice and decides she's going to punish the heads of the Master's households. So down to the crypts Dany takes the heads of the Master's families to see her little dragons and had a little godfather tete-a-tete. Then she shoves one of them forward and we get a big whoosh. Someone needs to teach those kids some manners. It's not nice to fling blood on our guests, or is it fling guests' blood? I always get so confused about dinner etiquette, like where does the soup spoon go and what order should the guests die in? Dany must be facing similar etiquette issues because she's looking around thinking, who am I going to roast next? And when she reaches out to Hizdar to make him hors d'oeuvre number 2, he grows a pair of testiculars and says, Vala Margulis. It almost made me like him. Dany decides the kids have had enough to eat and that they'll just come back tomorrow. I'm not sure about this scene. I understand that Dany feels like she needs to make a statement of power and assert herself. And I understand she's angry. But it's in such contrast to the way she's behaved in the last couple of weeks about wanting to be fair and just and give people trials and stuff like that. So I'm really kind of torn about it. One part of me hated it and another part of me loved it. So ultimately, I don't think that killing a random master was actually the right way to go about asserting herself, however. From the hot confines of Meereen, we go to the colder than a witch's teat environs of the Wall, where we see Sam reading some news about Dany to Master Aemon. Poor Aemon, he wants to help his only remaining living Targaryen relative, but no sooner does he say that than Jon walks in the room. Curious the timing on that, don't you think? Jon has come for advice and Aemon gives him one of the most beloved speeches from the books. He tells Jon that he must do what he thinks is right and not worry about what other people think. He says, kill the boy so the man inside you can be born. So Jon goes off to do just that, and his first stop is apparently meeting with Tormund Giantsbane. Jon finds out that the wildlings aren't really following anyone right now, and that they've gone off to a place called Hardhome, which is north of the Wall, off the coast of the Shivering Sea, past the Haunted Forest. Jon tries to convince Tormund that his plan is to bring the wildlings back to Castle Black and settle them on the gift. And in return, Jon wants the wildlings to fight for him when the White Walkers invade. Tormund refuses, of course, and then Jon calls him a coward to his face. Then Jon takes his cuffs off and stares him down just mere inches from his face. Now the argument that he makes is the same argument he used on Mance, but this time it works. Tormund agrees, but he says Jon has to come with him to give his assurances directly to the wildlings himself. Is it just me, or does there seem to be a fixation in Westeros with burning your opponents alive? Once that's settled, Jon goes to the Great Hall where he has to convince the men of the Night's Watch. They don't like it one bit. Sam stands up and argues on Jon's behalf, but they respond talking about Ollie's family and how they died, and how the wildlings have killed all the villagers that were in the gift. And then Thorne points out that the Night's Watch has been killing wildlings for thousands of years. Then surprisingly, Dolorous Edd stands up and says because they killed Grenn and Pip, he cannot forgive them nor forget. Then Jon gives him the best pitch that he has. He says we can learn to live with them, or we can add them to the army of the dead. And because they're human beings, they deserve better than that. But the men don't sound convinced. So Jon retreats back to his office where he has a private conversation with Ollie. Jon throws the ace in his hand at Ollie and says, winter's coming and we will all die without help. So Ollie still isn't buying it. It just goes to show you that people won't often do what is rationally in their own best interest when their emotions get in the way. And he gets all kind of frosty with Jon and then takes his leave. Poor Jon, he looked so exhausted and sad when Ollie left the room. Further south, but still in the north, we see Pod and Brienne settling into an inn that has views of Winterfell in the distance. While Brienne is staring moodily at the castle, Pod tries to convince her that maybe they should just leave Sansa there. It is her home, after all. And obviously Brienne disagrees, so that's that. Then Brienne talks to an elderly man and tries to convince him to send a message to Sansa, but we don't know the contents of the message just yet. And speaking of Winterfell, we're taken to Ramsay's bedchamber, where we find him lounging naked and getting very angry with a very pouty Miranda. She's upset because she knows Ramsay's going to marry Sansa and that he's attracted to her. Anyway, the scene ends with some rough sex. and Miranda promising never to bore him. And in a way, Miranda's trapped too. She knows that if she ever bores him, or he ever gets tired of her, she's as disposable as a microwave dinner tray. Still in Winterfell, we see Sansa pondering her predicament when the elderly woman's servant from last week stops by again and tells her to light a candle in the highest window of the broken tower if she ever needs help. After the servant left, I thought I could see the faintest glimmer of hope in Sansa's eyes. Enough hope that she goes to scout out the area around the tower, which is incidentally the tower from which Bran was pushed in Season 1. And who should saddle up next to her but Miss Slap and Bite, who then compliments Sansa on her dress. Now, this entire conversation was planned out by Miranda so that she could convince Sansa to go into the kennels, where, you know, if you're a book reader, that's where Theon lives. I wasn't worried for Sansa because I know that Theon lives in the kennels and that that's what the surprise has got to be, but Sansa doesn't know that. So her going in there was probably not the smartest move she could have made. So when Sansa finally gets to the last cell, she sees Theon. And of course she's shocked, and Theon shakes his head as if to say, no, I'm not Theon anymore. But you know Theon is still in there, and you know how we can tell? Because he's ashamed of himself. He hides his damaged hand, the one missing a finger. He hides it so she can't see it. So he's buried somewhere down deep inside there. As Sansa's shock turns to anger, Theon scoots away from her in fear, and then she runs out of the kennels. From one difficult situation to the next, we see Theon now dressing Ramsay as he's getting ready for dinner, and Ramsay confronts Theon, asks him, "You're keeping a secret from me, what is it?" Did you notice how Theon only looks at Ramsay when he's compelled to or when he feels safe to do so? That's exactly the way Miranda was looking at Sansa. I think both of them have been very well trained by the psychopath to be very subservient around him, and so you can see it in both their behavior. So I get the impression that Theon was instructed to stay away from Sansa so she wouldn't see him and know who he was. But it's not Theon's fault that Sansa found him. At the end, Ramsay makes Theon get on his knees, and for a millisecond there I thought something sexual weird was going to happen. And then I realized, he's just going to mindfuck him and make him think he's going to take off one of his fingers. And then, of course, he forgives him. And as an audience, we're being mindfucked too, because we all were tense and then sighed a huge sigh of relief when we realized he wasn't going to hurt him. So Ramsay trots off to Din Din with the Familia, and Roose is trying to play the gracious host. There's nothing more off-putting than being treated like a guest in your own home. And Ramsay acts nice to Walda, calling her mother. Something about watching Walda drink makes me think that Ramsay will end up poisoning her, that he won't physically torture her or kill her violently, but that he'll just simply poison her in the end. But Ramsay is nowhere near done fucking with people. He proposes a toast to his marriage to Sansa. He's saying something about the Northerners being family that goes back for thousands of years, and then some huzzah to their wedding. And in a little act of defiance, Sansa doesn't drink with everyone else. Part of me loved the fact that Sansa didn't toast with the rest of them, but the other part of me was thinking, aren't you supposed to be playing nicey nice with him? And you know that being defiant with Ramsay makes him only want to hurt you more. Walda must have noticed Sansa's discomfort because she tries to say something nice about, I know you're in a strange place and blah, blah, blah. But it only serves to irritate Sansa more. Ramsay didn't like being called strange. See that creepy-ass smile? That's some weird shit. Ramsay then forces Theon to come out of the shadows and pour everyone some more wine. And in the process, he gets to torture Sansa a little bit more by reminding her of what happened to Bran and Rickon. And then he's got the nerve to say, the North remembers. And of course he's messing with Theon too because he reminds him of how he's changed him and turned him into Reek. Again, Sansa acts defiant and calls Ramsay out on his behavior. Ramsay forces Theon to apologize for supposedly killing her little brothers, which we know he didn't do, and poor Sansa's crying by now. I just wanted to smack Ramsay into next week. The day he gets his comeuppance, I will be dancing for joy. Then he's just got to top it all off with saying Theon can give the bride away. Roose finally steps in and puts Ramsay back in his place by announcing with Walda that she's going to have a baby and that it's most likely going to be a boy. This effectively burst Mr. Cray-Cray's balloon, and didn't you just love Sansa's little smile there at the end? Cut to a post-prandial discussion between Roose and Ramsay. Ramsay throws some shade at Walda, but Roose just basically ignores his jibes and tells him that he had behaved appallingly at dinner. When Ramsay complains about possibly being replaced by the baby, Roose decides to tell him about how he was born. I guess in some weird way, Roose thought this would endear him to Ramsay, because he follows this weird story up with, "You're my son and I need you." Roose says Stannis is coming to Winterfell and he means to take back the North on his way to taking the Iron Throne. And Roose says he has no intention of giving up the North, and says they need to fight for it and be of one accord. Back at Castle Black, we get what might be important name drops. Sam and Gilly are in the library talking about all the books. Gilly wants to know if that's the largest library in the world, and Sam says no, they're all at the Citadel, which is in Old Town, which is much further south in Westeros, which of course Gilly knows nothing about, and he just makes her feel really stupid. Sam realizes his misstep and tries to say nice things about her, and then tries to kind of redirect the conversation, saying how he wanted to be a maester when he grew up, but he ended up at the Night's Watch instead, and without that, he never would have met Gilly. Stannis interrupts this little romantic moment, and we get another potentially important name drop. Stannis realizes that Sam's father is Randall Tarley, formerly a Targaryen supporter, famed for his military prowess, and now loyal to the Tyrells of Highgarden. Stannis then asks Sam, who is clearly not a soldier, how he killed a White Walker, and Sam tells him, obsidian. Stannis tells Sam to keep researching dragonglass and how to kill the White Walkers because they're going to need to know. So there are all kinds of implications in this scene, and I'll talk about them in more detail in the spoiler section. Next we find Davos still at Castle Black doing a wood carving when Stannis enters and tells him it's time to leave Castle Black. Davos counsels him to wait until Jon returns with the wildlings, but Stannis says no, we can't afford to wait. Stannis says Stannis feels they have the advantage in horses and men right now, and he's not even sure if Jon will return, or if he does return, when he would return. His other reason is that he thinks winter could come at any moment. Then he tells Davos that Selyse and Shireen will be coming with him to Winterfell. He actually believes they'll be safer in the middle of a battle in the middle of winter than they would be safe at Castle Black. Did you note how when Davos walks out the door just after being told that Shireen will be at Winterfell, how he stops and sees Melisandre looking at him, and how ominous that is? I'm wondering if Davos is worried about Shireen's safety around Melisandre, and I have more thoughts on that in the spoiler section. So the next morning we see Stannis and his troops mounting up, and Shireen is talking to Davos about the crypts at Winterfell. Don't you think it's strange that she would say such a thing? Selyse interrupts Davos and tells him to stop scaring her daughter with tales of battle. I don't think Selyse has the slightest clue about what's going on in her daughter's head, ever. Davos then admits to Shireen that he is scared of the upcoming battle. I swear Davos is the wisest man on the entire show. Shireen gives a really cute wave goodbye to Sam and Gilly, while Queen Pruneface gives them the evil stare. Stannis and Jon say goodbye for what I think is their very last meeting in the show. Jon promises to return Stannis' boats once he's done gathering the wildlings and returning them back to Castle Black. And as Jon worriedly watches Stannis mount his horse, Melisandre is giving him the long stare, and it ends up in a little smirk, which makes Jon uncomfortable. Seeing Stannis and his army ride away from Castle Black kind of made me sad. I've really enjoyed the intersection of these two storylines together, and ever since the last half of last season, I've really started to appreciate Stannis more, and so I'm kind of sorry to see him go. Plus, I hate to see Jon all alone. Now that Stannis is gone, Sam is the only one who's on Jon's side, who remains at Castle Black. From the frosty north to the hot mess in Meereen, we get back to Grey Worm's bedside, where we see Missandei still sitting there devotedly. And then he wakes up. We find that he's been unconscious for 3 days, and Missandei has this sad duty of telling him that Sir Barristan is dead. Grey Worm feels like he failed everyone because he was afraid, and he was afraid because he thought that if he died, he would never get to see Missandei again. Of course, this is exactly why the slave masters removed the unsettled business parts, because they didn't want them to become attached to others. But to stop human beings from loving one another, you have to rip out their hearts and their minds. Grey Worm's statement makes Missandei melt like hot butter on cornbread, and she lays a big old smooch on our favorite Barack Obama look-alike. I know a lot of people don't like this storyline, particularly since it's not in the books, but I think it's fine. It doesn't entertain me to see people miserable all the time. One little light shining in the darkness isn't going to kill this show, and it makes all the difficult stuff that we have to swallow go down a little bit easier. Missandei goes from Grey Worm's bedside to Dany's chambers, where Dany asks for her advice on how to deal with the Masters. Missandei tells Dany that there are always more than just the two choices that she's presented with, and that she should think on her own and come up with her own solution, something that may be in between or is a completely third, fourth, or fifth choice. So Dany goes down to Hizdar's cell, and he immediately starts begging her not to feed him to the dragon. Now this scene endeared me to Hizdar even a little bit more than earlier. He's crying and he admits he's afraid, which takes some bravery. And he said the only reason he was brave the day before was because he didn't want to die a coward. Dany admits to making a mistake and not listening to him. Dany admits that she's made mistakes and that she wants to correct that by marrying him and opening the fighting pits. I like this scene because Dany had a lot more agency than she did in the books. She gets to choose that she's going to marry Hizdar, and she comes up with the idea in the first place. And it does make sense. I mean, if you're going to rule a traditional society and you don't come from that society, then it makes sense, and rulers often do this, where they marry a person who is powerful and native to that society. What I didn't like about this scene is it seems like her decision was so abrupt. Maybe it could have been transitioned a little smoother, I don't know. And why does she choose Hisdar? Is it because she knows him best? Or because he's the least threatening master? Or is he the youngest, most attractive one? I, again, don't know. I have more thoughts on this scene, so go to the spoiler section. Still across the sea, somewhere on the way to Meereen, Tyrion comes to from his bitch slapping in the last episode. Jorah is in no mood to talk and basically ignores all of Tyrion's attempts at banter. Tyrion is still trying to get wine from Jorah, and let's face it, he's going into withdrawal, but his pathetic attempts to get wine are interrupted as they approach Valyria. Now, this whole sequence is different than it occurred in the books, but I actually like it better. The producers have moved the boat journey from the River Rhoyne and have moved it to the coastline, where Jorah is following the coastline from Volantis to Slaver's Bay, where Meereen is situated. And in order to follow that coastline, to avoid pirates and not go too far out into the summer sea, Jorah has to hug the coastline. And when he gets to Valyria, there's only one place to scoot through. And it's not a very safe place to go through. And if you're not a book reader, you don't know that. So the producers and writers have to make you understand what they're approaching. So you get a little backstory here, which is nice. They do it very nicely. Now, as they're sailing through here, the graphics are just absolutely stunning. Some of the best graphics, I think. I just could not have imagined it better. I think they did a wonderful job. They come to a place where the channel narrows and goes under this type of thing like an aqueduct or a bridge. And while they're doing that, Tyrion and Jorah are both quoting this wonderful poem about the doom of old Valyria. And just as Jorah ends and the music swells, we see Drogon flying overhead. I mean, it's one thing to hear about dragons being back in the world, it's another thing to actually see one flying over your head, and Tyrion is just finally stunned into absolute silence. So immediately after this great little moment, you see a figure stir over Tyrion's right shoulder, and then it jumps in the water. Then, just as the boat moves under the structure, thunk, someone drops in the boat. George starts fending them off with his oar and tells Tyrion to not let them touch him, because these are the stone men, highly contagious with grayscale. Tyrion is not so lucky, however. His hands are tied, and he can't really hold a weapon, and he can't really fight back. Tyrion ends up flat on his back while Jorah's trying to take care of all the stone men. When finally one jumps in front of him in the boat, and he's cornered, and the only place for him to go is down into the water. So Tyrion escapes into the water, but unfortunately he can't swim with his hands being tied, and he scrambles to untie the ropes. And just as he's trying to do that, a stoneman who's in the water already grabs his ankle and pulls him down into the darkness. Then the screen goes blank, and tens of millions of viewers are sitting there in stunned silence. Now, even though I knew there was a 99.999% chance that Tyrion wasn't dead, certainly not at this point in the story, I still had a little tremor of fear, and they left the screen blank for 10 seconds, which seemed like a frigging lifetime. We finally see Tyrion begin to blink, and he sees Jorah's face. Probably the most beautiful sight Tyrion has ever seen in his entire life. And didn't you know the minute Jorah said no, he wasn't touched, that he was lying? Now they'll have to proceed on foot the rest of the way to Meereen, and Jorah has the quickly creeping crud growing on his body. So how much time does he have left? How fast does it spread? How easily is it spread? How can he hide it? Can he keep others from catching it? There are so many questions that even book readers don't know that will keep us all on the edge of our seats all the way through to the season's end. That's it for this episode. We're halfway through the season, and boy, is it getting good. I'll see you next week. I think they had the dinner with Ramsay, Theon, and Sansa for something other than just showing that Ramsay is a dick. I think they wanted to remind us that Theon supposedly killed Bran and Rickon, and I think that's important. And I'm speculating the reason that is important is because Theon is going to eventually tell Sansa that he did not kill Bran and Rickon, and he'll do it in order to gain her trust a little bit, and also to get a little bit of forgiveness, which he's going to need if he's going to help her escape. Are the implications of the name drops of the Citadel and Randall Tarley. Does the name drop of the Citadel mean that Sam will go there? Not necessarily. I think we know that there's something important to be found at the Citadel. Since it has the largest library and the greatest sources of information in the entire world there, then it stands to reason that there might be some answers there. Answers about how do they fight the army of the dead, and how do they cure grayscale, and how do you tame dragons. But what are the ways that Sam could learn that information? Does he actually have to go to Old Town to find that out? Will they introduce Old Town in season 6, this next to last season? That seems kind of late. I really don't know, but somehow, someway, the information that is in the Citadel has to get to Danny and or John, and Sam is the best conduit. Now, whether Sam has to physically go to the Citadel or not, I don't know. As for the Randall Tarley mentions, I think if Sam is sent south, he will encounter his father again, and he will gain some closure. Now, that closure will be of one of two kinds. Either his father will recognize him as being a good man, or he won't get that approval, and Sam will realize he just does not give a flying fuck about his father's approval anymore. Either way, I think Sam will get some closure. Now, others have speculated that Randall Tarley will end up in King's Landing and be on the small council, but I don't think there's any evidence for that right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see, I guess. At a minimum, I think Randall Tarley will be there to help develop Sam's character further and provide some kind of means or motivation for getting information from the Citadel. Since Melisandre, Shireen, and Selyse are all going to Winterfell with Stannis, and we know that the battle doesn't go all that well for Stannis. He has a pretty rough time. That's when I think we're going to see Melisandre make her attempt to sacrifice Shireen. Now, I'm not sure if Melisandre is going to succeed in sacrificing Shireen. She may attempt to sacrifice her and that will fail, or she may attempt to sacrifice her and succeed. But I think whether Melisandre succeeds in killing Shireen or not, I don't think it's going to make any difference in the outcome of the battle. And Melisandre's going to realize that. And then she's going to remember Jon, and she's going to start thinking, maybe I've been backing the wrong horse all this time. I think Melisandre will actually end up ditching Stannis and returning to Castle Black because she's going to start thinking that Jon is the actual Azor Ahai and Stannis isn't. This is about Shireen mentioning the crypts at Winterfell and asking if her father would go down to them. Now, I'm wondering what this mention is about. I think Shireen is going to discover the secret passages under the crypt, or she will give Stannis the idea to go look for the passages and he will find them, and that will help him win the battle at Winterfell. In my last video, I may have misspoke and said that Hisdar was behind the Sons of the Harpies all along, and I could have sworn I read that in the Winds of Winter Sir Barristan point of view excerpt, but I could be wrong about that because others have said maybe I didn't get that right. Nevertheless, I'm 900% certain that Hisdar and Dany did not enjoy each other in any way, shape, or form in their marriage, and that Hisdar never really wanted to marry Dany at all. And once Dany had flown off on Drogon's back, Hisdar was more than happy to take control of the city, and he did not waste any time getting a new woman in his bed. Now, if they show Hisdar after Daznak's pit and Drogon flying away with Dany, then I think we're going to see the woman that Hisdar has in his bed, and I'm betting really good money that that woman is the prostitute who's been helping the Sons of the Harpy all this season. And when we see her with Hisdar, then we will know that Hisdar has been behind the Sons of the Harpies all along. This is in regards to Grayscale and Jorah catching it. I at first thought that Grayscale might replace the Pale Mare in Meereen, but I don't think that's going to happen now. And I think because if Jorah takes the Grayscale to Meereen and it becomes rampant in the city, I don't think Dany would leave them to go to Westeros and leave them to suffer. However, if it does spread there and it spreads really rapidly, maybe Dany will have to leave quickly to escape it, and that's what triggers her to return to Westeros. So I guess it could go either way. One thing I am really certain of is that someone needs to take Grayscale to Westeros. Now, in the books, that was a guy by the name of John Connington, who is not on the show, so Jorah is evidently taking his place. So Jorah's role, one of his main roles in the next couple of seasons, is to take Grayscale to Westeros. Now remember, as I've said in past videos, I think Grayscale coming to Westeros ties in with Shireen, something about her being the cure, or knowledge about how they cured her to cure others. And I also think it ties in with Sam going to the Citadel and needing more information. Wouldn't it be ironic if Sam found out how to fight the White Walkers and how to cure Grayscale and about dragon powers via the Citadel? Sam would end up saving more lives with his knowledge than Jon and Dany could put together.